in 90s and was its first executive director. He was also a founding member of the Madras School of Economics, just to mention a few. I'm very happy to report to you that he has been a member of the IHD Board of Governors also for 3 years when he was Chief Economic Advisor of India. Kaushik and IHD, his university, Cornell, and Ravi Kanbur was also associated. Kaushik, Ravi, and I were coordinators. We organized a major international conference in 2008, December, called Development, Freedom and Welfare in honor of Professor Amartya Sen on his 75th birth anniversary, in which some of the world's best scholars and experts had participated. Inaugurated by the then Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, it was rare that 3 Nobel laureates were speaking in one platform: Professor Sen, Amartya Sen, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, and Professor Edmund Phelps. It is very rare, and of course, it was not because of me, it was because of Kaushik. I am also very happy that Professor Pulin Nayak, a former professor of Delhi School of Economics, and again, one of the outstanding economists of India, again with global repute, is presiding over this lecture. He's known for his contributions in various fields, including public economics. He's also very closely associated with IHD. He happens to be the chairman of the IHD academic committee. So thank you, Professor Nayak. Friends, on this occasion, many of you might have heard me, so I don't want to repeat so many things about IHD. But just to tell you briefly, we have completed rather 26 years. After 25 years, we started in January 2023, Silver Jubilee celebrations. And several Silver Jubilee lectures were organized. The IHD houses Indian Society of Labor Economics. In fact, IHD, it is rare that something unusual, that an institution was created by a professional body. So it was created by the Indian Society of Labor Economics in 98. But ISLE, Indian Society of Labor Economics, is located in IHD. Its journal, Indian Journal of Labor Economics, is also located there. We published rather 2 journals, Indian Journal of Labor Economics and Indian Journal of Human Development. So this IHD, somehow we have formed a very good network. We have completed more than 400 projects, published some 70 monographs and books, and organized more than 300 conferences, including several international, but also outside India, Hanoi, Bangkok, Dhaka, to name a few, at least 5. Friends, as my colleague Tanuka Endo mentioned earlier, during its year-long Silver Jubilee celebration, ISD has been organizing several events. The Silver Jubilee lectures, about which I just mentioned, we had lectures delivered so far by Hajun Cheng of SOAS, Albert Park, Chief Economist, ADB, Sunita Narayan, noted environmentalist, Indrajit Gill, Chief Economist, World Bank, the post which Kaushik held several years back, Abhijit Banerjee this year on 3rd January. Francisco Ferreira, Director, International Institute of London School of Economics and Professor. Again, Thomas Foge of Yale University. 3 lectures, more lectures, today after Kaushik's lecture, are scheduled till March, which is the end of Silver Jubilee. Deepak Nair will be delivering a lecture on 15th February. On 3rd March, John Reyes will be delivering a lecture in Ranchi. IHD has a Ranchi office, Eastern Regional Center, that is why. And last lecture will be, unless until we have another lecture, 30th March by management expert, industrial relations expert, Rama Bijapurkar at Hyderabad during the conference of the Indian Society of Labour Economics. As a part of Silver Jubilee, and many of you might have attended, we organized 3 major international conferences. The first one was New Technologies and Future of Work in Global South during 17-19 July, which might have, I think, since I have seen only Kaushik's abstract of the lecture, might have covered several aspects of the lecture, which are speculated rather, which Kaushik is delivering today, in which close to 300 people were there, including 35 from outside India. The second conference on inclusive and sustainable urban development in Global South, it was organized by IHD in collaboration with Niti Aayog, University of Florida, and all that. And the last conference, which we called Global Conclave on Advancing Human Development in Global South, in which Kaushik had chaired the first plenary session on January 11. We had participation of over 500 people, including around 140 from outside India. So this was about Silver Jubilee. Although we are not fully exhausted, but it will end in March. But by the way, we annually organize Indian Society of Labour Economics conferences, in which 600 persons come. So friends, I won't take much of your time and obstruct the lecture by Kaushik on a topic very important in the contemporary discourse, both academic and policy. The topic of Kaushik's lecture, Policymakers Challenge Navigating the New Global Economy and Changing Nature of Work, is very timely and fascinating indeed. World is changing on an unprecedented speed, in which the fast technological changes are the most important change factors. Of course, the internet, but now artificial intelligence, ChatGPT has changed our life and society, economy, and will change in future on a speed after which we do not know much. In fact, the uncertainty in the world has increased because of the technological inventions. The world of work is changing tremendously. Work from home is a small thing now. New jobs, according to one estimate, 40% of the jobs in the world will be lost in 1 decade. But several will be created. We are not sure whether there will be enough work for all the people, and people will be idle. But maybe enough wealth to create. We do not know. There is a lot of uncertainty. But it seems that, and in the abstract Kaushik has mentioned also, human capital and high-level skill will be key to economy and work. In fact, very challenging to address this issue, and Kaushik is venturing into it. I am sure that Given the lucidity, oration that Kaushik has, the lecture will be extremely interesting and stimulating. Thank you very much. Yeah, I request Professor Pulin Nayak to now take over.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. I think without any loss of time, I would request Kaushik to deliver the lecture. And I think the way we'll go is, I'm told that there will be time for a question answer session.
Yes, yes.
So the first the lecture, then the question answer session, and finally I'll make some concluding remarks. That's how we'll. Okay, good question. Yeah. Oh, it difficult navigation over that. Yes, I've managed. Yeah. इसका तो जरूरत नहीं है ना. बता दो. Thank you. Alak, Pulin, Ravi, Tonuka, thank you very much. We are missing Priyanka, who's not well. I've been corresponding with her. To all of you, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And for me, actually, it's feeling a bit like a reunion, because I see my friends from college in Delhi over here. I see some of my colleagues from the Ministry of Finance days here. And Pulin, I should tell you, this to me, it's a lovely bit of coincidence that we had, not coincidence, but a fact that we had joined the Delhi School of Economics on the same day. We took the interview, we both cleared it, bunch of people took it, we both, and I still don't know who's senior, because who signed first and who signed second, I don't know. But we joined on the same day. And it's also bringing back memories of early days. Pulin, his wife Nalini, my wife, meeting in Kamla Nagar, meeting in Model Town, lovely days, absolutely just wonderful to be back. Usually economists make forecasts far away so that you can't be caught with wrong forecasts, but Alak just ended his introduction by saying, I'm sure it will be a very interesting lecture. Alak, you should never make a forecast of something which is about to happen, because I may prove you wrong. But thank you very much. Okay, well, with that, the topic today is a rather serious one. It's a grim one about the state of the global economy. There is trouble all around, and a kind of trouble which does not happen routinely. The nature of the global economy is changing, and it is changing in ways. Let me put this up. Let me see if I'm managing this right. Yeah. I'm glad this is working. Yeah, it's changing in ways that we had not anticipated. And some of the fundamental structures of the economy, which we take for granted, are beginning to change. Let me explain a little bit. The immediate causes of the turmoil in the global economy all around the world happens to be the COVID-19 pandemic wrecked up the economy. After that, the war in Ukraine, currently the brutal war in the Middle East, all this is turning things upside down. And we very often sort of put this down as there were remarks, for instance, by Macron and others that maybe globalization has hit a roadblock and we will begin to see deglobalization now. But these are the proximate causes, the pandemic, the Ukraine war, the Middle East war. It is true it's causing us a lot of trouble, but the real causes have been building up over a time. And to my mind, I will just now show you. Yeah, but that's actually no problem. As long as I know nothing is showing here, it's fine. I won't point to it. I can manage without it. But I've got just very few PowerPoint pages. Even if it fails, I'll manage to convey in words. The bigger causes which were changing the structure of the global economy started some 40, 50 years ago. It's the revolution in technology. In particular, digital technology, artificial intelligence, AI, these things are changing the landscape of the economy. And what the COVID-19 and others have done, it sparked off some of the troubles which was ready and brewing. One particular example is, there are historical studies that when a new technology arrives during the Industrial Revolution, it would take 40, 50 years before people learn to use the technology. It's there, but you learn slowly. One of the things that COVID did, and all of us have had experience, is I remember the early days of COVID when I would be told I have to give a lecture by Zoom or WebEx or something. I would be fumbling, it would be difficult, I would call in assistants to help me. But most of us have mastered this digital interaction with others. And nowadays, conferences, meetings, whole lot of interactions, we are doing it on Zoom and all. So the learning by doing, as Kenneth Arrow used to point out, that the biggest hurdle for new technology is that you have to learn it. And the best way to learn it is by doing it. COVID stepped up that and made it much faster. Let me just give a minute to see if it works, and I'll start again. Is it working or? Yeah. Okay, it's coming. Yeah, let's see. अगर नहीं होगा तो ठीक है, I'll manage without. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the best way to understand what's happening today, the technological change is, okay, I'm giving up on that, but that's no problem. Yeah, it's coming on in front of me. Okay, okay. You'll have to live with this uncertainty, but I'm actually, I better shut it and do it. It'll help me with my concentration as well. Technological uncertainty, you can see some of the uncertainties of technology. Okay, let me begin to explain by analogy, why should technological advance cause problems? To me, the biggest parallel you can think of what we are going through is the Industrial Revolution. At one level, the Industrial Revolution was all good. New technology coming in, labor who used to have to do hard work, they would not be needed to do that work. So it all seemed good. But for the first 40, 50, 60 years of the Industrial Revolution, the global economy was in turmoil because the human interaction had changed. Child labor was shooting through the roof. The incidence of child labor in Britain was higher than virtually anywhere today in the world, in any developing country. 35% of children were working, doing hard labor. The skies were getting darkened. That's the Industrial Revolution. What saved us were two things, and I, as a researcher, want to concentrate on one of them. One is radical policymaking. People paused and said that standard policy is no longer working. You have to think of novel policies, and there were regulations being brought in. For instance, there was the new law saying 10 hours a week. No one is allowed to work, the children and women initially, not allowed to work more than, I said it wrong, 10 hours a day. 10 hours a day was the limit that was placed. Today, it seems to have a law saying children can't work more than 10 hours is completely normal. But those days, since I had a lot of interest in child labor, I know that literature very well. There were fascinating debates with the British aristocracy saying that the hard character of our working class will be lost if children don't begin to work from the age of 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. That's what builds character. They would, of course, not build their own children's character by that method, but the working class's character was being built by that method. That was the early writings. We also forget that certain policies which today look completely normal did not exist. The income tax comes in 1842. When it first comes in, people are screaming, how can government interfere in our income in this manner by taking away a part of it? Now we realize that, you know, when you're running a big country, there are public goods you have to provide. The government needs money, and you have to do that. I feel we are at a juncture now where we do need radical policies and different kinds of policies than we typically talk about. And I will give one concrete example a bit more carefully in a moment. Antitrust law, which has a long history from the United States from 1890 to now. But I do feel that there are many domains of the new problem where standard antitrust law is not working, and we have to think outside of the box for new kinds of regulation to take that on. So that's an example, and the Industrial Revolution really is a good example of, at one level, it's technological progress, but that's causing turmoil. One more theoretical point. And the second thing which saved us, I do think, one is radical policy, and other is radical thinking of theoretical economics, understanding the world. Very often, this happens by outsiders. That time there were philosophers, David Hume, looking at the economy and trying to understand with his friend, Adam Smith. They were very close friends, and they would be discussing continuously about trying to understand the economy. Hume's predominant interest, of course, became philosophy. Adam Smith's became economics, though Adam Smith also began as a moral philosopher and then drifts into economics. Today, again, is a time for novel thinking. And if you go back to the time of Adam Smith and pause for a moment, you'll see what a staggering kind of discovery it is. Adam Smith is looking at the world that all his colleagues are looking at. People are working, producing food, producing clothing. It's reaching people who need the food. It's reaching people who need the clothing. An outsider looking at this will ask, is there a dictator who's saying you produce food and reach it there, you produce clothing and reach it here? No. Okay, that's fine. So how was that happening? It struck Adam Smith that there is something called the invisible hand of the market, which somehow brings together the interests of various people. And he writes up his Wealth of Nations. I must put in a footnote over here. The invisible hand has been so misused ideologically, from the right being pulled, as Adam Smith shows that you don't need government at all, it'll all happen automatically, that one should point out that Adam Smith never thought that the invisible hand was the central message of his book. And the biggest evidence of this is when Adam Smith's first edition came out, when Smith is alive, and he helped prepare the index, invisible hand was not there in the index. So Smith didn't even realize that later people will forget everything else Smith has talked about, moral philosophy, moral compass, etc., and only the invisible hand will remain. In fact, the invisible hand enters the index posthumously. When after Adam Smith dies, by then people are picking up. That's the bit that is picking up. Adam Smith's ideas were in words. He's trying to understand the economy. It took about 100 years for those to be written down in equations. In fact, exactly 98 years, when Leon Walras writes down the Smithian system as a general equilibrium with equations and everything. But a little bit more, the history of economic thought fascinates me. Walras describes the full economy and the equilibrium under which goods will be traded and sold. But one thing Walras could not do, he could not prove that the equilibrium exists. So it's almost like those scientific problems. This is the equilibrium. It'll have these properties. But he could not show that the equilibrium exists. Now, this needed a mathematical theorem. And this I got a very first-hand account when I was at the World Bank and invited Kenneth Arrow to come and speak. Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu were the people who gave the proof of the existence of the theorem. And Arrow at the World Bank audience, huge audience, he explained how he got it. By then, Arrow was 94 years old, but he got excited recounting the story. So Walras had left it open, but existence was difficult to prove. Then someone will correct me, 1941 or 42, I forget the exact year, a theorem in mathematics comes out called the Kakutani's fixed point theorem, which was used by John Nash. John Nash is the genius of game theory, to prove existence of equilibrium in games. Arrow said he read that and he realized that can be adapted to understanding the macroeconomy. So good 70, 80 years after Walras comes the next breakthrough. So deep insights into the economy is being gained. I do feel we are at a juncture now where we need, again, the novel thinking, looking and staring at the economy. And by novel thinking, I mean thinking which is not taking up one axiom and changing it and all, but really deep thinking. And for that, there is another reason. One thing where it's a critique of mainstream economics, we economists write down the assumptions that we need to build structures and models explicitly. What we don't realize is that there are many assumptions we make, which we don't even write down, that we take for granted. And I'll give you one example, which I've written about. When will trade take place between people? We write down formal assumptions. Preference has to be transitive. There has to be diminishing returns to scale, diminishing marginal utility. We write these down formally, and then trade will take place. One assumption that we never write down, but without which trade would flounder, every time you go into a market and trade, and if you do a complex trade, you need to talk. Look, I will offer this much price, what will you give me? No economics textbook among the assumptions will write down one assumption, can talk. That's taken for granted. Social norms, that we all follow minimal social norms. We don't go into the marketplace and try to snatch away the goods and run. These norms are not written down in economics as assumptions, but these assumptions play a role. No surprise that some of the biggest breakthroughs in disciplines come from outsiders, because people who do this every day, they get trained in a way that they can't think outside of the box. And I'll give you my favorite example on this is Euclidean geometry. Euclid writes up his geometry, writing up all the axioms explicitly and then proving the theorems. It's a work of just great beauty. But there were axioms that he took so much for granted, he didn't even write that down as an assumption. One of them we do know, that the entire geometry is being done on a flat surface, was to Euclid so natural, he does not write that down as an axiom. But think for a moment, if you use Euclidean geometry on the earth with fast traveling aircrafts, you would make disastrous mistakes because the earth's surface is not flat. Nearby, it looks all flat. But as soon as you're taking the whole surface, it's not flat. It's spherical or stretched spherical, whatever it is, there is a term for it. So you needed a non-Euclidean geometry. And what people forget is some of the earliest insights that Euclidean geometry had this assumption, whereby it does not apply to the modern world. One comes from a German lawyer, Karl Ferdinand Schweikart. Omar Khayyam had a sense that Euclid was using an assumption without being aware of it or without writing down. I feel economics is at that kind of a juncture, and I'll give you a few examples of that, mainly in words. I won't even try, but I will in a few places maybe wrongly point there, but I will explain clearly enough. You will follow what I'm saying. Among the changes taking place in the world, let me first touch on global supply chains. A lot is being written about this. That what's happening in the world today is that for one product to be produced, which you or I will consume, that production of that is not going through a factory, through one supply production chain, but chips are being made in Taiwan. Some minerals are being pulled out of Indonesia. They are being assembled in India, going to another country. Finally, it reaches the final user, but the product has gone through a chain, through a supply chain. This has given us huge advantages of what is called increasing returns to scale. Those who are producing chips are only producing chips, so they are masters at it, very efficient. Those who are producing tires for cars produce only tires, they are very good. So supply chains has given us economies of scale, and the world has become much better off. But there is one very, very big problem with it. And think of it in this manner. Let me explain this with an example. There are students, as I came in, I met students here, so for them it'll be familiar. Traditional markets that we study, industrial organization that we call, take the automobile market. In the old-fashioned models that we economists would write down, if there are 10 producers, 10 companies producing cars, it means there are 10 companies, each one producing a car. Maybe the 10 companies in 10 different countries. If one of them closes down because there is an earthquake or political trouble, one country closes down, it's being made by 10 corporations, production will drop by 10%. Global prices will rise. There'll be problems. But come now to the supply chain, global supply chain economy. When you say that there are 10 corporations producing cars, what it means today, and I'll make it a bit extreme to make the contrast sharp, one company producing all the tires, one company producing all the gearboxes, one company assembling together. It's not literally one, there'll be one or two, but the 10 are now not producing 10 full cars, but 10 components of it. If one of them stops production, it's the whole automobile industry is jolted. This actually, we should have known this better. From the period of the COVID through Ukraine, we are realizing that the supply chains get blocked somewhere. In the United States, building houses, input prices were shooting up. And they were saying that it's getting blocked. It's coming through long distances and not arriving. So the supply chain economy is a very, very different economy from the one that we are used to, that economics has modeled. And to understand these economies, what kinds of policies you need, you have to step out of the box and do some analysis and understanding. One more example, and then I want to come to labor. I began with the invisible hand. Standard economics from the 18th century and all the way up to here, and it is time to change. Some of these changes that I'm pushing you towards, thinking outside of the box is very difficult. I don't even pretend I can take you there, but I want to just open up doors and get us all thinking so that we can get there. So take, for instance, the old-fashioned markets, which we still take to be the case. Lots of people producing fish, lots of people buying fish, lots of people wanting to give car rides, taxis going around, lots of people wanting to use it. How do they get together? How do they find each other? Adam Smith never really understood it, but he said, I'll call this the invisible hand. There are lots of buyers, lots of sellers. The invisible hand brings them together. Come to Walras. Walras is more sophisticated. Everything is being done mathematically. Walras describes the sellers, producers, describes the buyers. Who brings them together? It's the invisible hand of the auctioneer. He doesn't model that they come together through the invisible hand of the auctioneer. Come to the modern world. In the olden days, and you don't have to go very far back, 10 years, 15 years, wanting to take a ride, you would go out into the street, look for a taxi. If you know someone in the street corner, you go there, you look. And taxis also cruising around looking for who will need a ride. But now you've got these platforms. The platform will get the buyers and the sellers together. Buying goods, Amazon, you get onto Amazon, lots of retailers are selling their products on Amazon, lots of buyers are trying to buy their product on Amazon, and they are being brought together. So that what was the invisible hand and a slightly mystical thing in Adam Smith, or the imaginary auctioneer, again an invisible character, suddenly is a corporation. Amazon, Uber, they are bringing buyers and sellers together. Their only job is to bring them together. And what is more, this is a profit maximizing corporation. So the invisible hand today is a profit maximizing corporation, which makes our understanding of the economy vastly more complicated than what we had done earlier. This led to a lot of soul searching on the nature of antitrust law. And let me do that. The PowerPoints would have forced me to go in a different route, but let me use the route that I'm taking now. Let me just get into now antitrust law. In the United States, I don't follow the debate so much in India. In the United States, there is a huge amount of soul searching going on about antitrust law. And the reason is, there are people who are writing, there are legal scholars, there are economists who are writing. I mean, there's Suresh Naidu writing very prominently, Glenn Weil, Cass Sunstein, that antitrust law needs to be enforced better and more effectively. And they are drawing to new agents whom we had earlier ignored, but we need to put our attention to. You know, in the United States, antitrust law starts in 1890. 1890 is the Sherman Act. 1890, by then, how monopolies function, how oligopolies function, we already knew, because 1838 is the work of Curnow. Curnow wrote down descriptions of how they work. When 1890, the American law is coming in, the Sherman Act, and later there would be the Clayton Act, the Robinson-Patman Act, all refinements and different aspects of monopoly. They have an understanding of the market. Now, these people are arguing that you can see, Amazon and other platforms are making mega profits. Inequality is increasing. It's increasing all over the world. It's increasing in India particularly sharply. This is a major concern. One of the reasons are these platforms that are making mega profits. What do? Can you apply antitrust law? There are people who are saying you have to apply antitrust law with greater vigor. I do believe antitrust laws are important. You must employ them well. But This is taking us beyond antitrust law. And the reason for this is the following. Even if you go back to the Sherman Act of 1890 and the Clayton Act, I may be getting the year wrong, I think 1914 or 1915, you will begin to see that they are pointing out that antitrust law works very well when you don't have a natural monopoly. If the product is such that you need to have very few firms, you can't have too many firms doing that, the whole advantage will be lost. You can't use conventional antitrust law. The platform is a good example of that. Now, Uber, one convenience of Uber is there are 2-3 companies like Uber. You get onto that, you look at the price, what's available, and you book. If you now make a law that there will have to be 500 Uber-type platforms where you can get on and buy and sell taxis, you're back to the old world. You're getting onto each one, searching and getting down. So the whole advantage, the economies of scale comes from size. When that happens, the Sherman Act had recognized when it's a natural monopoly, this is not the route to go, and indeed we face that. I believe we have to really think of very, very novel policies with the biggest of platforms, not all. And here, there's a somewhat provocative idea. This is something that I've worked on with my student, Aviv Kaspi, and the law professor at Cornell, Robert Hockett. It's an idea which you have to take with some caution and care because these kinds of ideas can be misused and you don't want to jump in and put it into effect too quickly because there can be negative fallouts as well. You see, with some of the biggest platforms, you don't have the choice of cutting it up into many. The whole advantage will go. What do? There are 2 possibilities that we discuss in the paper. One is you make it very dispersed shareholding law. I don't even quite understand how you'll do it, but you make a law that no one can hold more than 1% of the share. You may have to have a law like in patents and intellectual property that for the first 14 or 20 years, it can be a few people who are making all the profit because you do need the incentive to start something major. But after that, it'll be a very, very dispersed shareholding so that even if the company is making mega profits, it's going into mega pockets, those profits. There's another thing that you have to think about. It's dangerous because I do believe the private incentive entrepreneurships are very important. You can't bring in regulations and stop that. But if a firm becomes so important for the economy that for anyone to survive, you have to enter through the gates of that firm to operate in the modern economy, can that firm be left as a profit-maximizing entity is an important question. And historically, we've had a very important example of that we have faced is money creation. When the Bank of England came up in 1694, it was a private entity, the Bank of England. 1,200 shareholders were making profits. It was gradually being realized that, yes, we do want profit motive, we do want big firms, but if a firm is so crucial to survival in the modern world, if you don't have access to money, you can't buy or sell. You need to enter through the gateway of the central bank to be in the modern economy. At some point, it was realized this cannot be left as a profit-maximizing entity. This has to be non-profit with regulations, etc., and not even make it just a nationalized firm. It needs lots of special regulation. I feel for some of the biggest platforms, which will become your gateway for a person to survive, you need to think in terms of radical policies of that kind. We are at a juncture where that is important. Let me jump to labor, which is what is of central interest to IHD. As I was saying at my last meeting here when I came, that the Institute of Human Development, no matter what its importance at the beginning when it was founded, today has become extremely important because this is one of the most important sectors, the labor sector and human capital sector. So let me tell you a little bit of that. I do want to leave some time for questions and answers. The demand for labor is dropping. I had a PowerPoint, but I can describe that to you very, very easily. If you take the last 50 years and take all the advanced economies, United States, Japan, Australia, European Union, 50 years ago, if you take the national income, the fraction of the income going to workers as wages and income, even self-employed small workers, what they're getting. In Japan was about 77% is going to workers. The 23% is going as profit, intellectual property, etc. So the GDP disproportionately going to workers. Australia, it was 65%, United States, 62%, etc. 50 years ago of the national income goes to workers as wages. Look for 50 years, seldom do you see such steady graph in reality with statistics as you see on labor. The share of labor is going down steadily over the last 50 years. All the advanced economies where labor cost is high, of the GDP, smaller and smaller amount is going to workers into their pockets. This is the dropping demand for labor, for mechanical labor, which is creating a challenge. As very often happens when big challenges arrive, people react to that with knee-jerk. This is the policy, this is what you should do. And a lot of that can backfire and really do more harm than good. United States, I hear one debate all the time, that you need to stop with our demand for our labor going down, stop outsourcing. Don't have firms getting workers from the Philippines, South Africa, India. India, of course, is very prominent in this. Don't allow for that. Then the demand for our own labor will go up. American labor's income will increase. Will that work? I don't think so. Whether or not you want to do, and here is my reason, plain simple logic rather than any data. If one particular country begins to do that, we won't use outside labor, the much cheaper labor available. We will put artificial barriers, no digital connectivity with Bangalore. We will use our own workers. What will happen is that the final product that comes out of this country will be much more expensive because for a particular input, a major input labor, you are not taking advantage of the cheap labor available, which again in itself would not matter. But if Germany is using that labor, China is using that labor, the cheap labor around the world. If United States does not, United States will be outcompeted on the product market because their production will be very high. One of two things will happen. Either the United States will realize that this policy is not working. China is outcompeting us by using cheap labor from wherever else that China's buying. So it will stop doing that. And if it does not stop doing that, it will perish as an economy. Time is short. I mean, one striking example which fascinates me is Argentina and United States. If you go back to 1915, the two countries are neck to neck. Argentina's poorer than United States, but among the top 10 richest countries. It has had 40 years of growth of a kind very rarely seen, and there are magazines and newspapers, even in the United States, writing that Argentina is going to overtake us in terms of per capita income. Of course, that did not happen. United States is now 5-6 times per capita income higher. What went wrong with Argentina? It is a bit of this. Argentina developed a hyper-nationalism where it was blocking anything coming from outside, including labor. United States went through a period that time of people coming in from Germany. By 1960s, Indians coming in, they were opening up. So I feel the hard block that Argentina played a role. There were other things also Argentina did, which I think was wrong. Hyper-nationalism was one of them. The other one was that education and importance of higher education. I do plan to spend 2-3 minutes at least on that. I feel education is crucial in today's world. United States, whether they had realized it for the right reason or wrong reason, much more important, I think, than United States' hard power is United States' soft power, which is education and research, was given absolute primacy of place, and it, of course, outstripped Argentina. It's worth keeping in mind. What do we do about the labor challenge and the falling demand for labor? I feel that there's going to be two things. One is, first of all, the demand for mechanical labor is going to go down very, very rapidly. For countries, I had a chart over here where I show the high-income countries, then the lower middle income countries like India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Pakistan in that cluster, and then the very poor economies, low per capita income economies, the World Bank classification. The challenges are different. In the advanced economies, the demand for labor is already falling. So it is becoming a challenge. There, they have to face up to one thing, which in the populist debate you don't hear. every time work gets outsourced to a cheaper labor, say in India, there's hue and cry that, look, those laborers are taking away the income of these laborers. What is not pointed out, though, to the fairness of a few economists like Stiglitz and others who are remarking, when you outsource, when a company in America outsources and gets cheap labor, profit shoots up. So it is not just our labor versus their labor. It's our wage income versus our profit income. There is a tension between those two, and you can make many of the corrections, not by blocking this global search. Anyway, in the long run, you'll get outcompeted, as I said, but by allowing for the fact that you have to have transfers from the rich to the poor within the country. For countries like India, emerging market economies, my own back of the envelope calculation is that another 10 years, we can more or less continue the same way meaning I do think there are lots of things going wrong. We have to make corrections for those policies, but we don't have to worry about our wage rate rising very sharply and the demand for that reason going down. Raghuram Rajan and Rohit Lamba have recently written a book. I generally find myself in agreement with most of the things that Raghu says, but on this I have a disagreement. They don't stress the manufacturing sector enough and say that we can do it through services. India has done it mainly through services, but I do feel the manufacturing sector has a lot of scope, and this large body of labor, India's youth unemployment is one of the highest in the world. It's shockingly high. To correct for that, you have to pay attention to the manufacturing sector. And to my mind, there's another 10-year window before our wages also begin to climb, and we have to worry about that. But 10 years, you can actually employ the youth, and that is crucial if you don't want the India story to go berserk, if you don't attend to that very, very quickly. But that's for these middle-income countries. And some of that competition you can see. Bangladesh is doing pretty well, the employment, but there's also these things are historically so interesting. Bangladesh and India inherited exactly the same labor laws. Actually, I should say it a bit differently. Bangladesh did not inherit. That time, Pakistan and India inherited the same labor laws because India's Industrial Disputes Act of 1947 is a pre-15th August law. So both Pakistan and India inherited the same law. Pakistan got rid of it some 7-8 years later for all the wrong reasons. They didn't want labor laws in place that would give them much greater freedom to give exploitative wages, etc. And especially the Bangladesh labor they were very concerned about, so they revoked it. So by the time Bangladesh is being born in 1971, it's being born without the pre-independence law of India, which I do think is a baggage. You can't do away with it. Workers need a lot of regulation, but intelligent regulation, a lot of this is not. Bangladesh was born without that. And Bangladesh, as we do know, some of the sectors are doing very well. 2 or 3 years ago, Bangladesh overtook India in terms of per capita income, which is quite shocking. You do not grudge another poor country, another emerging economy doing well, but that should not have happened. But it's mainly the manufacturing sector which is booming and doing that. India's again growing fast and hopefully will pick up, but let us see what happens. That's it. At the global level, what do you do? A couple of suggestions. This is again a radical suggestion. Suggestions which look radical now. If, let us say, take a world where the demand for regular labor vanishes, you've got robotics, robots going around. You've got artificial intelligence, machines sitting there doing even intellectual work. I do believe that a small segment, which is creative work, will remain with human beings, very creative work. But short of that, it could go away. Is this such a tragedy? At one level, it is not. If you don't have to do any forced work, which you don't enjoy, work for which we typically have to demand money because machines can do it, it would not matter but for one fact, that as the demand for work goes down, what is happening given today's regulatory structure is wages are vanishing and the GDP is all accruing through profits and intellectual property. If you can have a system that when work vanishes, all the money does not go into the pockets of those who own the shares, but workers also get it, then it's not a tragedy at all. Work has gone, machines are doing all the work. You're sitting around and doing leisure, and there are early writings of utopia, which described as very little work to be done. I have a research agenda over here. Since there are students, I'm actually a very ambitious research agenda, which I don't know if I'm being foolish at this stage to get into. I want to begin to investigate. My plan is actually to start this in the next 3-4 months and keep the next full year to study this. The meaning of labor. You know, labor in economics is defined in a very mechanical fashion. Things that you don't want to do, someone has to pay you for you to spend time to do that. If that kind of work vanishes, what is labor? At one level, there were hints of this even historically. You don't have to enter the new world. There are certain activities where you really don't have to be paid to do that work because you enjoy that work. Paul Samuelson, guru in my field, who became very wealthy through his phenomenal textbook success, actually said that I've been very lucky because I get paid to do something that I would do even if I did not get paid anything. So for Paul Samuelson, research and writing and thinking is pure pleasure. He just happened to make a lot. You can see in the world of art, Picasso would probably paint endlessly, no matter whether he got paid or not. He did happen to be paid hugely. Vincent van Gogh would do the same, and he did the same, and he didn't get paid anything for it. So there are activities, if the mechanical work goes away, it'll all be pleasant work, depending on whether the person who's doing this work values it more, or the person who's watching or trying to buy this work values it more. Which side of the market will pay whom? The listener of the music or the one who's playing the music? That will keep flipping. One beautiful historical example, that is Socrates. It is believed, Xenophon points out, that Socrates liked teaching so much that conventionally in the olden days, the Greeks would have to pay to the teacher. You pay to the teacher will come and pay. So the teacher is doing labor for the students to pick up. But Xenophon says that I'm sure Socrates likes to teach so much that if Socrates was required to pay to people to come in and sit down quietly and listen to him, he would be willing to pay. So it would flip over as to which side of the market is labor, which side is work. What we have to do in terms of policy, that's my theoretical agenda. I feel we have to move in a direction which again today sounds radical the way income tax must have sounded radical in 1842, which is that we have to think of a shared economy. This is something that Marty Weitzman used to write about. There are a whole lot of other people who are writing now. That when the labor income goes, that graph that I had, which I could not show, the share of income going as wages is virtually vanishing. Everything is becoming profit. If you want the world to thrive, you have to have a sharing economy, which means part of the profit has to be taken up as shares and distributed among the people who are sitting back and doing nothing. At times, people say, as soon as you point out saying that workers will get income from the shares without having to work, people get shocked. Won't you hurt their sense of dignity getting money without working? But if you think of the feudal lords, they did no work, got a huge amount of money. We did not feel sad that we are damaging their psychology, that they are becoming so rich without working. We are reaching a stage of the world where you have to think of a fraction of the profit, and I do believe the profit motive is important. You have to leave space for that. But a fraction of it as a share, Marty Weitzman's original work written as a theoretical work, the time has come when you have to think of policies of that kind. Can I take another 3-4 minutes? Yeah, okay, because I want to hear you all and take some questions. Just that, what might the future look like? These are areas where I'm working a lot on currently, different things. I'll give you a bit of a glimpse. Problem for the world, problem for us also. Growth rate, what will happen to GDP growth rate for the world? India has its own problems. I do worry about India. Politics is so polarized. I feel it is beginning to affect some of those unwritten assumptions of the economy, and the long run does worry me. But it's a globally very, very difficult situation, and we need to put our minds together about this. If the world economy continues this way, can growth continue, or will sustainability put an end to it? We know from statistics, Angus Maddison and others, pre-industrial revolution, the world economy is to grow at 0.3% per annum. Whole global economy growing at 0.3% per annum. After the industrial revolution, the growth rate had gone up to 2.1% per annum, so 7 times faster. Now we are going through another technological revolution. People are saying that this kind of growth increase is not possible. I feel it's possible. We could shoot up the growth rate, or we can certainly go back to a very fast growth rate. But what constitutes GDP is going to change. It always changes, but people very often forget. Whenever we say GDP growing faster, we think of more cars, more houses, more luxury hotels. But any student of economics knows GDP or national income is actually anything we value and we are willing to put money on. Better health, better education, listening to music, literature, anything that you value and willing to put money on, they constitute parts of GDP. So my hunch is if we navigate out of this right, the way we did during the Industrial Revolution, we will get back to rapid growth again, but the constituent of that growth is going to change dramatically. The two sectors which to my mind will be crucially important, this is advice to India, this is advice to any country. I feel the education sector is going to be very important. We have to learn to train our minds for the modern world, which means mechanical education is going to lose importance. It's the creative education. So from school to college and frontline education, where India used to be really quite remarkable with the early IITs, Delhi School of Economics in 1949. Really, I used to say that in the world, when you go to international conferences, as an Indian, you feel very comfortable because with the Americans, with the Europeans, India's top education was so good that you felt completely comfortable. Education has to have great priority. Number two, health. This is a sector where I, of course, don't understand the details, but I feel this is going to be bigger and bigger. Life expectancy is going to be increasing. Research is going to increase over there. So health and education, if we can strategize properly, and I had actually examples which I didn't have time to get into, policies which look very normal and easy. If you leave it to just hunch and a few politicians making it, at times you'll get it right, but you can make disastrous mistakes. The world history is full of mistakes. Hyperinflations of a kind you can't imagine got triggered by political pressure. So you do need expertise. Economics is a very strange subject where part of it is intuition, part of it is like engineering. Because part of it is intuition, it's very easy to feel that it's all intuition and I can do it as well as anyone else, but it's a strange combination. We are at that juncture. Organizations, institutions like IHD play a very, very major role. The universities play a very major role. Thank you very much.
Well, Kaushik, thank you for that absolutely wonderful stretch of ideas that concern the issue of work and labor and how the world has evolved from the time of the Industrial Revolution to present times and what we might expect. Now, we have time for questions, of course, but I thought let me give a few comments of my own and some thoughts emerging from Kaushik's absolutely brilliant survey of the entire field of work and labor. After getting the intimation that I might be chairing this, I would be chairing this session, I decided to do a little bit of thinking of my own and a little bit of looking at some material. And a lot of the things that I looked at precisely coincide with what Kaushik has talked about this evening in a wonderful way. I don't know whether I'll be able to match that kind of wonderful sort of manner in which he was able to talk about, but the following are my thoughts on this particular issue. A good way to start would be, again, to go back to the time of the Industrial Revolution. So we are talking about the time of Adam Smith. And the interesting thing about the human history is the fact that if we take back human history almost 300,000 years from this particular point in time, go back that many years, 300,000 years, and come to about 200 years back or 250 years back. The interesting point to note would be that the situation of the average man or woman was more or less constant, or there was a very small improvement in the living standards over the long span of 300,000 years, almost, minus 250 or 300 years. It is the Industrial Revolution that brought about the change. And the change came in initially in a small kind of manner, or sort of moderate manner. But over time, it has picked up speed. And right now, the standards have gone up in a almost in an exponential kind of format. Now, how and why has this happened? It is this question, I think, Kaushik was trying to understand, and he looked at this entire panorama of issues that look at this issue of the growth and the growth of labor in particular. Now, what I would want to say is the following. The driving force of the increase in the living standards starting about the middle of the 18th century. So we are starting about 1750, 1760, 1770, etc. And Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is 1776. The key thing is that there were major technological breakthroughs happening, the steam engine and the spindle and so forth and so on. And many of these things were happening coincidentally in England. And England was the place where all these things were happening. And Smith was looking at this particular issue, and he writes his Wealth of Nations. Now, in his Wealth of Nations, you get a situation, and the very first chapter of Wealth of Nations talks about the division of labor, and how with division of labor, human beings are able to multiply the productivity, which was not the case earlier for a very, very long period in time. People who have written books on history of economic thought, including people like Galbraith and many others, Eric Roll and so many others, they look at this issue of human beings more or less living in relative poverty at the brink of existence for a very, very long time, but then suddenly something happens and things are moving. And that is the time at which Adam Smith writes about the nature of economic transformation and growth that is beginning to happen. Now, in the Smithian construction, one thing is important to note is that there is a sense of harmony. Smith asks or describes an economy, one in which the consumers are maximizing their utility, consuming to their fullest satisfaction. Producers are producing in a manner so as to maximize their profit. And they're all small units, and they're all getting together, and there is a notion of harmony. And if you allow individuals to pursue their self-interest, the end result is harmony for the society at large. And that is the notion of there is an invisible hand that Kaushik was talking about, which brings about the good for the economy and the society at large. Now, this particular notion is altered pretty soon, soon after Adam Smith. Within about 30 years, 25 to 30 years, you see the writings of Malthus, and then quickly after that, David Ricardo. Malthus looked at the issue in a totally different kind of context. He looks at the issue of the availability of food grains and the fact that food grains are increasing at what he ought to be an arithmetic progression, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. whereas population of England was growing in geometric progression, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, etc. And he feared that there will soon be a situation where there'll be a lack of food for the economy at large, and then what will the consequences of that be? This was a major question that troubled Malthus. And soon after, there is David Ricardo, who, by the way, never really studied economics as a student of economics. He was a stockbroker, son of a very rich stockbroker. They came from Holland to London, and his father did very well. And in his very young stage, David Ricardo was asked to look at the business enterprise. He was not very interested in that, but he had no choice. Father asked him to do it. He did that. But his real interest was to study the available texts in economics. And Adam Smith, of course, he studied, and many of the other textbooks. So he was a self-taught economist. And by a long margin, possibly today, if one were to think of the greatest economist in the world, possibly most people who are concerned with the subject of economics will probably answer David Ricardo, for the simple reason that Ricardo gave the notion of the theory of comparative advantage, which I think is possibly the greatest possible single theorem that economists have thought of. Apparently, there are periodic polls in American graduate schools and British graduate schools, and sometimes even in Indian graduate schools, and they ask, which is the greatest theorem in economics? And very often, usually, Ricardo's comparative advantage wins the poll. Now, Ricardo was talking about the issue of scarcity of land. Malthus was concerned about population. Ricardo was concerned about land, and the fact that the most fertile land will be first used, and then we'll go into the less fertile land, etc. Now, the point was, these two individuals, Malthus and Ricardo, talked about the issue of scarcity, which came for the first time, and that made the subject a dismal subject. Economics becomes a dismal subject. We come from the realm of harmony into a subject where things are scarce. The notion of scarcity defines economics. We move quickly on to through the 19th century and into the 20th century. And what do we see? What we see is that it is capitalism which rules. That is the system which takes the process forward. And in this process, there are the factory owners who are earlier on they used to be the landlords, now they're the factory owners, and there are huge incomes being made, huge profits being made, and you have the growth of the working class. And Kaushik talked about child labor, and Britain by 1845, 1850 was a terrible had a terrible situation to contend with. And it was a situation where ordinary people were leaving their farmlands, coming into cities like Manchester, Birmingham, London, becoming factory workers. There were children being employed. Kaushik talked about the child labor, working hours, and so forth. They were extremely backbreaking. And some of the best ways to understand this is not to look at the work of economists, but to look at the work of people like Charles Dickens, Hard Times, David Copperfield, and so on, which very accurately talk about the terrible condition that capitalism gave to the country that was ruling a lot of the world, including India, at that particular point in time. But the point is, capitalism moved on. Karl Marx was already predicting that this is going to end, there'll be a revolution and so forth. But towards the end of the 19th century, we come to a situation where the idea of innovation and technological growth, technology, the word that Kaushik used, that is the thing that altered the possibilities under capitalism. And by the late 19th century, we are talking about the Gilded Age, from about 1870 to about 1900. That is regarded as the golden age of capitalism, sometimes also called the Gilded Age. And that is the time when capitalism really took roots and huge profits were being made. And some of the profits were getting filtered into the lower sections of the population. It's not that nothing good was happening to the working class. Slowly, they were also improving. And then we come to the beginning of the 20th century. We come to the phase of telephone, telegraph, Model T, Henry Ford's Model T. And then we're talking about mass production, and where capitalism was also allowing for some kind of growth and improvement in the living standards of the bottom sections of the population. That was definitely happening. Now, and that is possibly the reason why the Marxian notion of revolution was still kept at bay, except one country, the Soviet Union, which went in for it. Now, what is the long and the short of everything? I don't want to take too much time. I'm not the lecturer of the evening. It is Kaushik. It is to his format that we have to return. But the only thing that I really want to say is the following. There was always a fear that technological growth is going to bring a death knell to labor. But fortunately or unfortunately, that never really did happen. Some jobs were lost, but new jobs were getting created. That happened in the late 18th century, that happened through the 19th century, that happened through the 20th century as well. When the bank nationalization and the mechanization, computerization of the banks was happening, a lot of jobs were getting lost. And many of the people who were doing the, writing the passbook, they would do the, put down all the numbers. All of those jobs were lost, but some new jobs were getting created. So that is the entire process by which old jobs going, new jobs coming up. Where are we today? Well, to cut a very long story short, the way I also look at it, definitely we are talking about a situation where we are possibly going into a world in which there will be fewer need for jobs. Definitely in the advanced countries of the world right now, India is much later in terms of the level of development. So India will come much later, definitely. But the advanced countries of the world today have a situation where there will be job losses, and it is already happening. The movement that happened on the Wall Street around 2011 and so on, the Wall Street movement, all of that was because people were losing jobs. And what is the possibility coming up in future? I just have to mention this. John Maynard Keynes had a very important essay which he wrote in 1928, Economic Possibilities of Our Grandchildren. He thought that capitalism, 100 years from that particular point in time, it is almost, we are at 2024, it would be 100 years of Keynes's famous essay, Economic Possibilities of Our Grandchildren, where Keynes is basically saying the following. He says that if you allow capitalism to grow in a methodical manner, and Keynes was a person who believed in capitalism, he did not ever want to have a socialistic or a communistic manner of organizing society. So he was anti-Marx, that is for sure. He thought nothing of Marx's intellectual abilities and so forth. He thought of some minor people as being better than Karl Marx. But that apart, Keynes, of course, was the great, brilliant figure of the 20th century. He thought that capitalism will deliver the goods, and what is going to happen in his estimation is the following. The demand for labor will go down. Huge profits will be made by some members of society, Adani's, Ambani's here, and Musk in some other country, and so forth and so on. And you'll have to find a way of channelizing incomes from those individuals who are making huge amounts of money to the bottom sections of the population, where through UBI or certain other kinds of arrangements, you have to make a dignified existence made available for the bottom sections of the population. Now, this is not too much of a harebrained idea, I can assure you. This is already beginning to happen. This is the way the nature of technology is happening. And another individual who talked about technology in a major way was Keynes's exact contemporary, Joseph Schumpeter. They were both born in the year 1883, the very year in which Karl Marx died, 1883. So that's the year in which Schumpeter was born. And in some sense, Schumpeter and Keynes were competing figures. Schumpeter talked about the gale of creative destruction. He thinks of capitalism as the system which will deliver. And it will deliver in a way in which new products will come and the old products will be thrown out. Think of your mobile handset. Every 2-3 months, it's getting obsolete and new ones are coming. So we are at a situation where there'll be huge inequalities. Kaushik talks about the inequality. That's very important. We have to think in terms of how to address that particular issue. And we have to address the issue of ensuring that the bottom rungs of the population get the adequate education and health, and they're healthy to play a full role in the development of their own respective countries and the world at large. So everything is not a pessimistic picture. Certainly, Keynes was a guy who always was a very optimistic kind of individual. And we can think in terms of a world coming where there'll be major changes, but these changes will have some winners, some losers, but on the whole, the hope is the system will work. So I will not take much more time, and I think we are going to have time for some questions. So, but the questions should all be on Kaushik's lecture, and please, so, yeah. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am. So we'll take 3 or 4 questions, let's say. First round, Kaushik answers, and then another 4 questions, and that's how we'll go, depending on how Professor Sharma. 15 minutes, yes. So the first question is coming up. Please mention your name and address the question.
There's a mic coming
Yeah,
to
go
you.
ahead.
And your name, please, also.
My name is Basu. I'm also a researcher, but somebody who looks at behavior and social norms. That's sir. The best part about your lecture, and it was a pleasure listening to you, is that non-economists like me, and not an economics student at all, understand what you say and can relate to our work. So thank you very much for making economics non-scientific. Thank you. Understandable to people like us. So that's why so many people sitting and listening to you. So we enjoy writing. 2 things that I really want you to talk a little more, or maybe research more or write a little more in this particular topic itself. One, in the changing nature of work, you did talk about gender and the role women are losing very fast in the workforce, especially in a country like India. We're nowhere to be seen, and actually we're dropping. And that's a very scary sign. And I don't know what the repercussions will be.
Ma'am, it has to be pointed questions so that we'll have some.
Yes, sir. That's one. That's one. Second, very important is the assumptions that you talked about. Perhaps it was earlier invisible, now visible, is the resource of planet Earth that we have been exploiting till now. We haven't talked about that and the implications of our work on nature and our exploitation of nature. That's all.
Yeah, good. Yes, yeah, here. And then you, yeah, please. Yeah.
I'm Archana.
Archana.
That's all right.
Ah.
I'm Archana. Okay. Well, it was very delightful, Professor Basu. I have 2 questions. One question is about when you are talking about this potentially shared economies. So how would it be theoretically so different from, an unequal society which has a provision for giving transfers? So that's one question. And the second question that I have, I mean, that's more,
Yes, yeah.
yeah. The second question is more, it's something that I've been thinking about. So given you talked about the importance of manufacturing, and I also, do believe in the importance of manufacturing, especially for meaningful employment. But given the productivity increases, So can manufacturing really provide meaningful employment? And I'm also coming from the place of, some surveys around NCR.
Archana, I
where-
think that'll go. That'll do. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Professor Bhatt, yeah. I'll come to you. Yeah.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I am Jiam Bhatt from Srinagar, Kashmir. I have a direct question, sir. You mentioned that there are two sectors which can emerge as the major contributors for GDP. One is education and the second is health. Do you think that our new education policy, which we have adopted now, is going to help in our goals for increasing GDP via this educational sector?
Thank you for the pointed question. One more question and then Kaushik. Yeah. Yes, one of you two, any one person. Somebody has to give the mic. Yeah. Yeah.
Sir, myself, DD Pandey. I am from DU ad hoc panel teacher in
Yes.
the environmental studies. My main emphasis on the environmental economics, particularly because there is in India, there are a lot of CDM projects are going on and other projects are going on. But can you put some positive comment on positive or negative, any type of the comment on the environmental economics in India, environmental benefit? to the
Environmental.
society?
Some question on the environmental economics. Thank you. Thank you. So Kaushik, four
Okay,
questions.
good. Yeah, you're testing my capacity to take a divergence of topics. So let me take first from Vasanthi over here. Labor, and I was going into the issue of just the demand for labor, but what you're drawing attention to is certainly an important topic within that, which is what kind of labor and gender. So I actually do believe it's extremely important. And the fact that there is women are pulling out of the labor force in India, that this is a very worrying thing. And for a side reason, this is not the central topic I was engaged in, but I want to point out one thing on which there is a lot of data and evidence supporting it is that when women work, or even if they don't work, they're outside the home interaction, which gives them power inside the household. It empowers them because they are bringing in some money from outside. That begins to change household decision making in ways which are largely beneficial. And on this, there are small studies and there are big data studies. In England, once they made a deliberate change where money would be handed over to women rather than some benefits government was giving. Dramatic changes. And I feel some of the sharp increases in living standards, India does very poorly on many standard of living indicators. That would begin to change if women were empowered through better access to job market. So that's a very big topic. I was not going into that, but I'm glad you drew my attention to this. And exploitation of nature that you're talking about, and which is also the last question that's coming on. Indeed, it's a concern, very big concern. There, the only thing that I was pointing to, which is somewhat relevant here, is that concern does not mean that the GDP is going to flatten out, we can't live better lives. And that does require thinking outside of the box and realizing that GDP or national income, the way we conventionally think, is not just that. There's scope, the way it is written up analytically, and Pulin was giving a lot of the history of economic thought. The early development of this idea is very clear, even Kuznets and all later on coming in. Anything which you value. Once you begin to conceive of national income in that form, it's possible to have a lot of growth, which is sustainable growth, but of course it's a very urgent problem if we don't get that right. Likewise, I do believe inequality is a very urgent problem. If we don't turn to this soon, we will have other kinds of problems. Archana over here, shared versus transfer, there's a good point. You can achieve some of this by transfer. The incomes are going to some people, and then you have a transfer. In fact, if you curate the transfer right, in the end, you'll get exactly the same incomes in the hands as shared economy. But I have a reason. Transfer sounds as if someone else had the right to the money and the government transfers it to you. Once machines have come in, robots, which has happened because of everyone's effort in different kinds. It's not just the way I earn income on my shares. People should have a sense of right to that. So I do go for the share income, which could be in terms of end result similar, because in the end, you should feel that if everything is being produced by machines, I played a role in that, my ancestors played a role in that as anyone else, hence the shares. One more point over here, I've just written a book, not yet available in India, but it will be available, where I do talk of one kind of transfer. I call this an accordion tax, where you take from the rich and give to the poor, but you design this so well that there is no change in rank that takes place. Because of my feeling that once people become sufficiently rich, it's not becoming richer that's of value, because what do you do with that? It's relatively. I'm richer than my person next door. So if you can use an accordion tax and cramp the entire distribution of income without changing ranks into a smaller cramped space, the same incentives will remain. Elon Musk will still try to beat whoever, but they're all much poorer than they are now, richer than us, but much poorer. And I feel you can do huge compressions. To me, today's level of inequality is unconscionable. It cannot be justified. And I do feel that on this, very often you say that the wealthy, the super rich, without giving away their money, how come they are talking about it? Well, even without giving away, they can argue that that's the direction in which we should go. And Paul Samuelson says that very clearly in one place, that, I've earned a disproportionate amount of income, but I've throughout voted for a system where that would not happen. Part of it was taken away from me and would be given to others. So that you had another question, can manufacturing provide employment, a meaningful employment? So my own hunches, what I was saying, another 10 years or so for emerging market economies, I think there is scope for that. But I feel ultimately it's going to go. Machines, the way they are coming, it's going to go. Then you have to think of all the other things that we were talking about. Will the new education policy work? I wish I knew more about it. So I can't comment directly on that. But all I want to say is I'm actually going a bit beyond that. Education has to be thought of in very novel ways. And the power of good education, you can see South Korea will probably in the next 2-3 years overtake Japan in terms of per capita income, which was unthinkable 30-40 years ago. But the prime driver is education. In South Korea, there are teachers who are valued like rock stars. And that centrality to education, I think, is a major driver. So, and if you look at intellectual property, South Korea is now per capita generating way above a whole host of other countries. So that's the kind of thing. I don't know enough of new economic policy, but I think we have to go beyond. These are important. Maybe I don't know the details, important or wrong. I don't know. But we have to think of the big picture of education is where we need to go. And the final one, I did lump it up together with the earlier question on environment.
So do we have time for another set of 4 questions? Yeah. So yes, gentlemen there, please. I'll come to you. Yeah. Speak out. Come on. Speak out. Yeah.
Basically, sir, my name is Dr. Mukhtar Alam, and I'm basically currently, very much, focused on platform economy and especially how the workers are getting it, and basically, thinking about, of course, keeping into all the policy pronouncements, which was made, especially even on the occasion of the global conclave. So in the session on social protection. So, sir, I found you, reflecting on the same, especially the future of the world of work. So in that, of course, I wanted you to basically say a bit more, because of course you have just mentioned on this part, but then especially I want you to kind of, flesh it out more. That that because workers now, workers are not being treated as workers; they are treated as partners. Like Amazon, is treating all its delivery boys in as partners.
So, sir, pointed questions. So time is brief. So
yeah. So basically, sir, I wanted sir, to just mention on this, because you mentioned very nicely that the platform economy, and we have large number of them in India. There are more than 50 platforms, which have been surveyed. And recently, we ourselves, have conducted a survey of more than 5,000 platform-based gig workers.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I think the question is clear to Professor Basu. Yeah. Yeah, the gentleman there. Yeah.
My name is Akhileshwar Sahai. I
Yes.
joined D school in 1978
Hmm.
and was one of your first students.
Yes.
You taught me microeconomics.
Yes.
I have two brief questions. Number one, what are your major concerns about the Indian economy? And how do you see the Indian economy after 5 years or 10 years? Thank you.
Very good. Pointed.
That was directed at
No,
you.
I know he was looking at
Yeah.
me, but I think yeah. Yes, please. Just a second.
I'm Raj Ganguly.
Yeah.
I just wanted your reflection on another set of technology that is coming in a big way and that has already taken over is biotechnology. And the kind of corporates, that they are having their hands on the bioresources, and that is putting the world economy to a different order. I wanted to another reflection from you, that is capitalism the anchoring definition of going forward the economy, or is it knowledge economy? Which way do you think that the incentives of the world citizen is moving towards?
Thank you. Ma'am, sitting here. Yes. Please, you can, speak.
A very short pointed question. You mentioned somewhere in your talk that you have a big research agenda for the students here. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Okay. So
Okay,
4 questions.
Let me take this all 4. In so let him, on the platform economy, as I was touching on that, it does concern me. There are the big time questions, and this is work that I've got a full paper. It's an unpublished paper, a long paper. So you are asking me to elaborate. It's there. Basu, Caspi, and Hockett. It's on a working paper. I can send it to you. But very, very briefly, that's a different point from what you said, workers being described as partners. That's a way of circumventing some of the laws. And that has even happened earlier, when the Industrial Disputes Act was somewhere 1982 or 3, it was made that as soon as your firm has more than 100 workers, the Industrial Disputes Act kicks in. You'll find many firms that will outsource work. So I get 99 workers, and for serving in my dining room, I give it to another firm that employs 99 workers. So you have all these firms with 99 workers getting around this law. So what I'm hearing a little bit about the partnership is something very similar. You're changing their category, some of the rights. So that's a correction that ought to be made, of course, very urgently. On platform, as I told you about the large question. Major concerns about India, and I'll tell you, right now, India's overall growth is pretty decent, 7.6% in the quarter. World Bank predicting that the year will be high 6.78%, something like that. It's come out with. In today's world, that is fine. India used to grow faster, but this is pretty good. I do have worries. One is inequality is going very high. India disproportionately high and very thin at the top. At a small number at the top, it's shooting up. Great worry about that. Youth unemployment is shockingly high. If you look at the data, it's like troubled Middle Eastern countries, our youth unemployment is begin to look at this. One of the things that is happening, the reason we've become so sensitive to, if you say there are 4 good things happening, 4 bad things happening, we are not being able to have an open discussion. But for policy changes, you have to look at it. And India was the master of global data. Using statistical techniques to use sophisticated statistics to collect data. Angus Deaton, the Nobel Prize winner, says even ahead of advanced economies, India was using these statistical techniques from the late 1940s, 50s, etc. We have to get back to that for this kind of correction. One more thing does worry me. As an economist, I look at this. Growth is fine, but one indicator India's falling over several years, the investment rate. The fraction of the GDP that is being invested, we are getting headline stories of infrastructural investment and all, we are doing fine. But if you look at total investment, including private investment, India for the last 7-8 years is falling steadily. We were among the East Asian countries at our savings and investment rate, but the investment rate has been falling, and that's worrying. So overall, there are good things happening, but there are also great worries that we should face up to them and try to address those corrections. Raj Ganguly, biotechnology sector, I just don't know enough. So it'll be wrong of me to jump into that and make a remark, but I can tell you a little bit about capitalism and knowledge, that's not really is it this or that? I feel the rise of the knowledge sector is going to make the capitalism a very different kind of capitalism from what we have experienced. So it's not this or that. But since you did bring in capitalism, I want to point out that even socialism, a lot of this we very often forget that a large part of the success of a system is the design, the intellectual power, just the intention is not good enough. If you think of early socialism, some of the early writers were actually thinking of a very ideal world, that people are getting what they need. People are doing what is their ability. These are ideals. But if you begin to do these things poorly, you end up with USSR, which was one of the worst forms of crony capitalism. 3-4 people with the president captures the country. So socialism can also morph into that. The design is extremely important. And in the knowledge sector, it is almost like the new colonialists arriving on a country. The few people who are mastering this are them. And this can change the landscape of interaction and how ordinary people view. That's why the sorts of things I was talking about, it's not that we will solve it just now. It's like at the time of Industrial Revolution, this big range of thought. We have to put them on the table, bring in the best minds, and take these challenges on. Yeah, was there one?
There was
last
one
question.
Yeah, ma'am who was asking something about your.
What? Sorry, I missed that. Yeah.
Your question was, yeah.
Talk about research agenda.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. Yeah, no, I'm glad. I like that question. I've got a huge research agenda on labor, the meaning of labor. And I'm also now very, very interested in group morality. That when a group behaves badly, how do you apportion it among individuals? I'm doing a lot of research on that. But these are so complicated, I won't go into this. But really, these are so close to my heart that if you or your students are interested, I'd be very happy to correspond about these.
Another round, please. So just a second. So yes. And then yeah. Quick and a pointed question, please.
You and Professor Pulin Nayak. Professor Sudhir K. Jain retired from IIT Delhi as professor in economics, management department. So you talk about the policymakers' challenges, and these policymakers' challenges right now in India, what we are facing is the competition among different political parties to give freebies. Who can subsidize how much? 80 crore people are being subsidized, free food, etc. Direct money transfer. Other parties, every party is competing on this. What is going to be its future? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
What you are talking, very sensible things. Is it reaching the policymakers? And if it is reaching, are they receiving it and doing the needful? In a democracy, judiciary does not interfere in policy matter. Right? Ultimately, it is for them to decide after the elections are over. Are they receiving it and implementing it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for the lecture. I had a question. You mentioned about I am Sunaina. I am a graduate student from Terry School of Advanced Studies. I had a question on the health sector that you mentioned. So, following the part of decreased demand in labor, we have a surprising scenario in the healthcare sector where there is shortage of labor, good workers, and there is absence of doctors and underpaid workers in the rural settings especially. So even with the increase in health expenditure, this problem exists. So how do you believe that we can bridge this gap of increased demand of labor but shortage of supply of labor in the healthcare sector? That is my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One question there, and yeah. Please stand up and ask. Raise your voice.
Thank you, sir. As someone who grew up, rather someone who studied analytical development economics, your textbook in undergraduate, and you described the changing state of play or the rules of the game of the global economy. Do you think it is time to rewrite our understanding of the development economics in general? And will there not always be a market for those who either take care of, in a completely robotic world, as you said, will there not always be a market for those who take care of the machines or create the machines?
Market for, I didn't get the last one, creating machines, okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, so 4
So
questions. So
let me take these on.
Yeah.
The politics of freebies and your thing also is advice going there. You know, among the research agendas, there's also a big important research agenda. Traditional economics, which political economy, is a field which began with a very short technical paper by Hotelling on politicians, the way they behave. It's just floundering now, just doesn't apply to today's world. And exactly the kinds of things that you're pointing out, that Ananga was just pointing out, that it is somehow becoming impervious to advice, to good ideas. And this is, I don't know whether there is an obvious way of solving this problem. One stumbles and falls, and then one gets up and realizes that you have to take some ideas on board. This has always been difficult in India. And all over the world. But some countries realize that economics, though it's one of these strange subjects where parts of it is where you need expertise, parts you can do without. If you make a mistake on that, I'll give you one example is this will be of interest to Anang as well, the 3G auction. You know, auction in economics is like an engineering science. I don't have time anymore. You can design auctions by writing down structures of how you do the auction. Who will get it? Will the highest bidder get it? Will the highest bidder pay the price of the second highest bidder? There's a big literature. Auction, if you do right, you can do very, very well. Fortunately, the 3G auction went in, it caused political controversy, but as auction design, it went through perfectly. So there is scope for that, but I'm afraid I do worry that especially if we don't look at the weaknesses in the economy, like the savings data, the unemployment data, even the corrective spirit is not going to be there. So it does worry me overall how it's going. And on political economy, there's probably scope for a new model. Sunaina, the question on the health sector, shortage of doctors, very specific. I know these kinds of things are happening in many places. If you look at a sector specific, there are shortages. It's impossible to jump in and give an advice, which is actually in some sense touching on the first one or two questions. These kinds of problems, when you confront, you have to sit back and say that, look, there is a special problem arising. You want this sector to go, but the doctors are not arriving. How do you create incentives? If you do the incentives wrong, you will hurt another sector. So yes, it's a big problem. One has to look at it, but it's talking to the point that I was making. These are the kinds of research. You know, research, there are two kinds of research. Fundamental research, where I'm not quite looking at today's problems, but I'm sitting down and trying to solve something. But then there is also research based on a current problem. Again, time is short, but you know, when I was in government, when inflation was quite high, over 10% per annum, the injection of food grain onto the market, how you do it, it's very difficult to get the attention of politicians that, look, food grain offloading is just not go and you offload. How you offload is going to affect the prices. And I remember intricate discussions on the modalities of offloading food grain. And there will be some such issues here, which I'm not in a position to comment on. And finally, rules of the global economy are changing. Development economics in many ways is going to change, but it's not that you immediately, I'm not recommending you throw out my book immediately. My book was written a long time ago, but I do believe many of those things have changed. And if you, in fact, in that book, I described some of the earlier thought, which was paralleling some of the discussions Pulin was giving. You know, Arthur Lewis, the dual economy. At that time, no one was thinking of dual economies because most of the early development economics thought was being developed in rich countries. Arthur Lewis, who had worked in Ghana, was very associated with poor countries, was aware of that. And I don't know if you know the history of that. He was walking on a street in Bangkok. And he said, my mind was full of why don't these countries take off? And his idea struck him, which became his very, very famous paper on the dual economy. So I think we are at a juncture where in many areas, including as you're talking of those who make the market for these robots, etc., there's a lot of scope for thought.
So, Professor Sharma, I don't see him here. So should we continue on? Oh yeah. So you tell me how we are half an hour beyond 7:30. But if you say, yeah. It should be over. So should we have? Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come a reasonable way from the time we started, even though we started a bit late in the evening. But I think it's been a great evening, and a whole lot of ideas have come about. Kaushik, I think, addressed most of it with a fantastic style of his batting. He always illuminates, and that has been something that I can say with confidence, having known him from 78 onwards. So thank you, Kaushik, and let's give him a big hand. No, Ravi will do yeah. So I will request Ravi to come and propose the vote. Thanks. Thank you. That change, I say, what a coincidence.
Thank you, Pulin. It's my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks to the speaker of the day, Professor Kaushik Basu, on behalf of IHD and on behalf of all of us. I don't need to remind ourselves that he covered a huge range of issues and a historical epoch in order to discuss the problem that he has posed, the impact of technological change, and rapidly on labor. All of us are familiar with some strands of this work, how this is going to affect the way we do things, how this is going to affect employment relations, the impact on production, the impact on distribution. But what he did going beyond that was to give a large number of examples drawn from history and the history of economics to show how how issues relating to economic analysis will change following the kind of technological changes that we are seeing today. He also described very clearly that in the last 50 years, the share of labor in national output has been going down globally. And in fact, the chart that he could not present before us because the PowerPoint did not work shows this very, very dramatically. And using that, he put forward the concept of a shared economy. All of you would agree that the lecture was completely scintillating, and I would request all of us to give him a big hand on this lecture. Somebody as eminent as Kaushik came to give this lecture because he is an old friend and associate of the Institute for Human Development. So thank you very much, Kaushik, for coming here today. The same goes for Professor Pulin Nayak. Professor Pulin Nayak, of course, again covered a huge trajectory in his comments on Professor Kaushik Basu's lecture, and also concluded on what I would say was a common note. So his concluding note, in some sense, reinforced Kaushik's own conclusions. All of us know that they were contemporaries in Delhi school, but we didn't know that they were exact contemporaries. We went back to the exact day that they started teaching in Delhi School of Economics. Thanks you once again, for being a part of IHD's many ventures. I have the pleasure once again to thank our director, Dr. Alak Sharma. Alak has worked tirelessly since last January in the IHD Silver Jubilee year. The number of events that have been organized, the number of special lectures that have been organized, huge conferences that have been organized, in order to put the 25th year of IHD on the map, so to say, have been tremendously, has really been beyond any description. My colleagues at IHD, Tanuka Indo is here, Aditi, Arjun, Vikas, and Rekha and others have worked behind the scenes. Priyanka was the one who tried to put this whole event together. Unfortunately, she was taken ill and she could not be with us today evening. But they worked ceaselessly. In fact, they worked ceaselessly through the last 15 months in putting all these lectures together. So my thanks are also to them, and also the background team, which works with the media, which works with the behind the camera, and so on and so forth. My thanks to all of them, and particularly to all of you for coming and spending a winter evening with us. Thank you all. Thanks a lot.
They'll have to be. And it synced very well also. Oh, chalo.